right, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully, everything is better, and that whatever technical difficulties we had previously will have been cleared up. And how do I sound to you, brother?
Oh, you sound 100% better.
Oh, thank God. Praise God.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay, wonderful. Well, good. I wanted to share something with you about, since we're talking about day two, and I think it's a critical topic that we should spend some time on with regard to the firmament, because it is an important piece of the puzzle when it comes to biblical cosmology. And as we were speaking about previously, when you really open yourself to the possibility of what the text is describing as this solid structure, and that the firmament was placed, um, fixed to the circle of the earth that was inscribed upon the waters of the deep, um, that there are other passages also that speak of it coming down and being fastened to the earth, as we see being implied in Amos 9:6, talking about how the vaulted dome of the earth is fixed to the heavens, and that it breaches that gap between the heavens and the earth. But anyways, there's a passage here in what's called the Perk de Rabbi Eleazar that speaks about this second day creation of the firmament, and it says, "The hooks of the heavens are fixed in the waters of the ocean. The waters of the ocean are situated between the ends of the heavens and the ends of the earth. The ends of the heavens are spread out over the waters of the ocean, as it is said, who layeth the beams of his chambers in the waters. The dome or inside shape of the heavens ascends upwards like a tub, that is to say, like a tent, which is spread out with its extremities fixed downwards, and its dome stretching upwards so that people can sit beneath it, and their feet stand on the earth, whilst all of them are inside the tent. In likewise are the heavens, their extremities are fixed downwards, and their dome stretches upwards, and all creatures dwell beneath them, as in a tent, as it is said, and he spreadeth them out as a tent to dwell in," which, you and I are familiar with the Isaiah 40:22 passage, because he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, again, in my opinion, that's speaking about the raqiya, the firmament, because now, having studied this information, I know without a doubt that the Most High God is seated upon the vaulted dome of the earth, and what John describes as a sea of glass like unto crystal. All of these things make a lot more sense when you examine them with this idea again of the firmament being this solid structure placed upon and fitted to the circle of the earth. And so, what did you think about this passage? I thought it was quite interesting.
Yeah, man, I was biting my tongue not to interrupt you, but wow, man, who was that? What was that reference?
It's from a book called The Perk, which I believe it means book, Pirke, de Rabbi, de Rabbi, Rabbi Eleazar. It's a book of commentary, much like the Chronicles of Jeremiah, which is one of the texts that I included when I did the parallel study on the first 4 days of the creation week. I took all of the references to the creation from the Book of Jubilees, Jasher, even the Chronicles of Jeremiah, the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, just different texts, and put them together with the King James, the Targum, and provided all of what they said to give people a better understanding of the creation week. And This is one that I studied after, but it is also a book of ancient commentary, and it dates, very back in ancient traditions. And, I found especially this quote uh, intriguing, especially since it speaks about the dome.
Oh yeah, I mean, talk about point blank. I mean,
Right.
That is an incredible text.
Mm-hmm.
That's really, really cool. Um, this is something else, is kind of a pet peeve of mine, is these people who want to say that it's poetic language.
Right.
I'm like, look, roses are red, violets are blue. You just heard poetry, yet it's still true. Okay, get it? Because it may have some, and I would contest that it's not poetic language, but even if it was, it doesn't negate truth. Are you going to say that the Psalms are irrelevant? The Psalms aren't true because it's poetic language?
Right.
I mean, how far do we take this, right? And when you say figures of speech, or they're using a simile, like as a tent, if we're talking of metaphors, I'm like, well, yeah, a simile is similar. A metaphor should convey in the mind of the listener or the reader something at least remotely close to resembling whatever it is that you're trying to discuss. So when the author, Isaiah in this case, wrote that the heaven is like or as a tent, well, anybody who heard that thought of a structure set up over a flat surface.
Right.
Nobody thought of a spinning ball hurled around another ball at 666,000 miles per hour, or whatever, 67, whatever it is, 67, whatever the number is, around a sun that itself is going half a million miles through an hour through the galaxy,
Right.
Complete nonsense. And I started to say right before the break that, as I was just diving into all this stuff, and many people have heard me talk about this. There's numerous times where I'm throwing the towel. That's it. I'm done. Forget it. I can't go any further. This guy, Andy Hoy, contacts me out of the blue and sends me this pretty thick package in the mail, and it was like a 9x11 or 9x12 envelope, with a bunch of stuff in it. And, look, I'm busy. I get a lot of emails, something that comes in that's more than a page or, a card.
Yes.
It goes in the, okay, I'll get to it later pile, which I unfortunately almost never get to. So it ended up going in that pile. I'm like, oh, geez, this guy just sent me like, but it was a mutual friend, somebody that knew him and myself, that said, hey, Zen, did you get a package from a guy named Andy Hoy? I'm like, yeah, it doesn't sound familiar. And he kind of explained it to me a little bit more. I said, yeah, actually, I think I might have got something like that. He's like, dude, you need to go home, find it, read it. I'm like, okay. So I finally did. And when I opened it up and I see this 6-story high dome tent that Andy, who is a structural engineer, not a flat earther, at least not at the time. You'll have to ask him where he is now. But at the time when he did this thing, he was simply a Hebrew scholar who was an engineer who was in Israel. He was in Israel studying the tabernacle in the wilderness and studying biblical Hebrew. And he's looking at the text. Now, the Torah specifically says you cannot add to it and you cannot subtract from it. Like, that comes with a heavy penalty. It's a severe warning. And so Andy's looking at the descriptions given for the tabernacle, and Bezalel, who's the guy with, I think the other guy was a Holiab or something like that. These guys were charged with making the thing. And so he's reading the descriptions, and then he goes to look at you can find these models in various places throughout Israel, whether in museums or in some cases actually physical structures set up in the wilderness for examples, for people to check out. He says, you always see this, long rectangular box with multiple layers of fabric laid on top of it, which actually makes no sense at all. Structurally, it's the least structurally sound thing you could build, a box like that. And with all those layers on top of each other, if it got wet, if it rained, you would have all kinds of issues with mold. And the Torah is very specific about, getting the mold out, and he's like, and plus the rough edges of the square box itself that these things are on, if it's windy, I mean, it's just everything he was looking at is like, this is the most ridiculous structure ever, But then what caught his eye was he was seeing that, wait a minute, because it is not a structurally sound thing, people had to add extra poles and rope and tent pegs and, things outside of the itemized shopping list that God himself gave to Moses to give to Bezalel and his buddy. And so now Andy's going, wait a minute, we can't add to, we can't subtract from. And I'm seeing a whole lot of additions right here. And so he's like, what? And it really caused a problem for him. There was some major disconnect for him. So he starts looking at the text again, and there's a lot of textual real estate given to the description of the curtains. And, he's looking at okay, so the curtains are clearly important because there's a lot of description here. And it says connect the curtains at the ends, but it doesn't specify which end. And these are long rectangular strips. So everybody assumes, keyword, assumes that you're connecting it at the long end. And when you do, you basically end up with a rectangular box. It's about the only thing that works. But the text doesn't demand that you connect it that way. It just says connect them at the end. So he's like, well, what if I connect them at the short ends? And when he did that, he ended up with a big circle as an outline, like a big circus tent, like a huge, dome-shaped circus tent. And now there's no more fabric overlaid on top of each other in a ridiculous fashion. It's fabric's all being used to cover this huge dome thing. And when you think of the creator of the cosmos creating something that's going to represent his house, so to speak, here on Earth with his people,
right?
That rectangular box is simply not that impressive. And I'm going to, here on YouTube, and I'm going to put up a screen share here. Everybody listening on the radio, you could go to project314.org. Project314.org is Andy's website. Right on the landing, on the homepage there, you'll see the typical layout of this rectangular box, in the wilderness. And if you scroll down, he's got this heading, but what if? And then just using the Hebrew text, not adding or subtracting anything from it, simply connecting the things slightly different than what the typical, reconstruction of the tabernacle does, you end up with a 6-story high circular dome tent. And when he told me 6 stories high, at that time I had an office building where I had my seat office, and it had a parking garage that was 6 stories high. And so every day when I pulled into the parking garage, I'm looking at the height of that thing. And I did a bunch of tests up there, when I was looking into the moon and the eclipses and all kinds of stuff. I was regularly on that roof, and I looked down from the top of that roof. I'm going, that would have been an impressive sight.
Right.
To any of the, that thing would have been swallowed up and nobody would have seen it. When the Israelites were encamped around it, you'd see this sea of tents and maybe this little rectangular box peeking up over some of the top of the tents, depending on the angle you were looking at. But there would be no mistaking this thing. If this was in the center of the Hebrew camps, a 6-story high circular dome tent, somewhat translucent, looking like a glowing red eyeball in the middle of the desert, that would have been an impressive sight.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, I think that the Most High, having established the cosmology, that, Andy's work really, it added to what all of us were being led in discovery. Mm-hmm. Well, those of us like myself and yourself that opened ourselves to new possibility and really examined the text with open mind, and with trying to put away our indoctrination and our preconceived notions. And for a lot of people, that's the most difficult thing for them to do, is to overcome their own bias and their own indoctrination, and to really examine the text with new light and new possibility. And so that's the hardest thing. But I think Andy's work, and just for the listening audience, I recently spoke with Andy, and he's going to be coming on with us soon as well. And he's since written a book about and shared beautiful illustrations and really well done. So people should definitely check out his book. And I believe he's got some posters and illustrations as well. But yeah, his work was another one of those confirming witnesses in my mind as to what God was leading many of us to new discovery and to new revelation upon. And, and now we know this to be truth. And the simple thing of that, curvature is non-existent. Um, that forces everybody to reconsider once you just learn that one simple fact, and the whole journey that you did in Chicago and confirming that that was not a mirage. You and Rick Hummer. I mean,
Mhm.
these kind of things, they add up, and it's just too much. And then myself being one that has looked at and examined many ancient manuscripts, many of which most people have never heard about, and even individuals like Flavius Josephus. He said this, the creation on the second day. After this, on the second day, he placed the heaven over the whole world, which in my mind is the dome that uh, was just spoken about in the previous quote, and separated it from the other parts, and he determined it should stand by itself. He also placed a crystalline firmament round it and put it together in a manner agreeable to the earth, and fitted it for giving moisture and rain, and for affording the advantage of dews. And so, even Flavius Josephus, being an ancient historian, speaking about and understanding and knowing the Hebrew scriptures, he describes the same thing that we are all now trying to bring forth to those who would listen, which that still remains to be a small crowd, and most still are vehemently opposed to this information. And I know you receive a lot of criticism, as I do, on this topic, and a lot of people, like a lot of my listeners are that listen to and hear the message of everything else that I talk about, but when I go into biblical cosmology, some of them will just, immediately shut it off. They don't want to hear it, don't want to learn anything about it, and don't want to be informed in any manner as to this revelation. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, I agree completely. And for me, the timing, when you walk with God long enough, you start to realize that He speaks to each of us in ways that we can receive it, ways that we can discern that this is Him talking.
Right.
And so the way He communicates with me is probably different from the way He communicates with you and others. For me, like I need confirmation. Like I'm a big
Yes.
lay the fleece out kind of guy, because I doubt a lot, and
Mhm.
I'm always too in my head thinking about things and overthinking things, and oh brother, so is it me? Is it am I making this up, or is this really God? God, if it's you, please confirm it. And stuff like that. So he maybe I'm a needy child, I guess you might say, but he knows that he needs to communicate certain ways with me for me to be able to move on and to receive it, and so when I was going through that sort of spiritual mental crucible, trying to figure all this stuff out, and what does it all mean, and I can't keep going on like this, and yada yada yada. The timing of when I received that package from Andy Hoy,
Right.
is not a coincidence. In fact, I was when I was doing a lot of theater, there was a roadie that was helping me load up some trucks up one day, and the word coincidence came up in the conversation. He said, my mother always told me that coincidence is just God being anonymous. And I thought, like, dude, I'm going to remember that for the rest of my life.
I like that. Yeah.
That's a brilliant statement. But yes, it's not a coincidence. This was like my uncle, there was a book called God Winks. And it's these serendipitous moments that, where God just does something, that that it's not a coincidence that He did it.
Supernatural, absolutely.
It's supernatural. It's touched by an angel kind of, episode kind of thing.
Right.
And my uncle, he's passed away since, but he had, your typical classic Texas Southern drawl, and he's like, "No, that's a God wink right there." God wink. That was truly a God wink for me. When the timing of when I received Andy's deal. And it was right after I had created the 3D model that people have probably seen by now in my presentations and on my Testing the Globe website. When I created the Yahuwah terrarium, I created that model in pieces from the inside out. So in fact, for the YouTube audience, I started using a 3D printer to make the thing. I've got this is a modular piece that has a base and has the circle of the Earth that goes into the base, and then a dome that goes on top of it. I got cutouts in the base for the pillars, and then the dome goes on top of it, and then the footstool of the Lord then is covered with water inside a larger box structure. And if you've seen the picture that I've done out there, so I had literally just created the 3D rendering of this thing that I later printed with a 3D printer when I got the package from Andy that almost just so happened to look exactly like what I just created.
Awesome. Yeah.
And so that was part of what got Andy to contact me, because he had realized that one of the reasons is Project 314, that's pi, right? So he had realized that the dimensions had a relationship to pi. So he's like, oh cool, in his mind is this confirms the globe. So he starts going online to look for copyright free imagery of the globe that he could use in his materials. And so he starts doing some searches, and like any of us who starts doing that, you start seeing words like image, composite, CGI, stuff that's telling you what you're looking at. It's not real. It's not the real deal. And apparently, and I guess as I understand the story, in the Google search, my model was there as an image too. And he's like, what is that? He looks at it, and he starts reading what I'm saying about Yahuwah's footstool. And, first he's like, what is this? And then he's looking at what I did, and he looks over at what he did, and he's like, what? So, it's kind of a God wink for him too, the timing,
right?
When he was working on that project, and when I was, getting to where I was with my research on it, on all of this. So, he has since become a dear brother to me. He's a really good guy, a good friend, and an encourager, somebody who's called me on a number of times to give me a pep talk, help me along the way. But I think he's got a powerful revelation. And look, he's getting hit all over the place too, because there is that mindset that no, the tabernacle in the wilderness is the rectangular box. That's so but I mean, as a structural engineer, as a biblical Hebrew scholar, he's got a rock solid case. And I would just say to people who may be listening to this or watching us on YouTube right now, spend some time on this website, go to project314.org. And I'm trying to think of what page it was. Yeah, he's got a whole bunch of stuff on pi. Oh yeah. Okay. There's a tab called design, and then a drop down menu, and the drop down under design is outside the box. And read his thought process there as he's going through it and as he's putting a thing together. And when I just started looking at him, I'm like, man, this guy makes a lot of sense. Now does that mean Solomon's temple was also a big dome? He hasn't said yes or no, not that I'm aware of. I think he's trying to build a case maybe at the moment for what he's before he comes out on it, what he really thinks. But I wouldn't be surprised, because we always read that after the Babylonian captivity, when they came back into the land, Ezra, Nehemiah, and those guys, they want to rebuild the temple, right? And they did. They built the second temple, but when everybody saw it, they wept, because it wasn't the grandeur of the first temple.
Yes.
Now we read that and we think, oh, it just wasn't as fancy. Solomon had more gold and flair to it. Well, maybe that's true, or maybe it was an entirely different structure. I don't know. I mean, this gets people like Rico Cortez all riled up, because the temple is like that's his wheelhouse. That's his.
Oh, really?
He's a temple guy. That's like his entire ministry. So he is very offended by Andy's model.
Oh, is he? Oh, my goodness.
I don't know that he's been hostile about it.
Yeah.
He definitely doesn't agree with it. That much is for sure.
Well, just really quickly before we go to break, it's my opinion that, the second temple could no way relate or resemble the first, because Solomon utilized demons and fallen angels and having control. there was not even an iron tool used in the construction of that temple. But he had supernatural forces building and working on, like if you read the Testament of Solomon. And so, the building by men and hands and tools could in no way equal the grandeur of the first temple. So, and so just my opinion on that. But yeah, we'll be right back, everyone, for a second hour. We do appreciate all of you taking the time to be with us and listen to us. We are going through the Genesis timeline and the narrative of the creation week. We'll be right back. My guest is Rob Skiba.
Well, I was going through one of many difficult days back, in 2015, dealing with this whole research and the flack and people going psycho on me every day and losing support and just all the trouble that we were having at that time. And so Rick was trying to encourage me, and I'm like, dude, I just got to go, man. I'm out of here. Save it. Bye. So I hung up on him, and he was just so frustrated. He's like, oh man, he was bummed out, that his friend he couldn't do anything to help his friend. So, right after he got off the phone with me, he looked outside and saw a box that he had gotten from, I think it was grandmother's attic or something. And the reason he had pulled that box down is because he knew there were some action figures in it that he was going to give to his daughter to play with. And so he's like, okay, well, I'll go out there and open it up. And anyway, he opens the box up, and right on top of the box was a folder from one of his courses in high school. And he opens it up, and it was I think it was a geography lesson or something. And he's like, what? First of all, what's this even doing in here? And this is the page I turned to. And so he gets the phone out just to tell me of the serendipity of that he was like, dude, he was sending me a message like, dude, we just got off the phone. I said, the first thing I see here, and the first question on the page that he turned to said, what were early ideas of the shape of the earth? And so he had just read it to himself, got his phone out to retell the story to me about what had just happened with him. And he gets to the page, and when he says, look at this, he's like, and it says, what was early thoughts on the shape of the earth or whatever. And he had written in his pen or pencil or whatever, it was flat. And the moment he said that, there was a loud clap of thunder and lightning, and it was a clear day, as I understand it. And it freaked him out, and his daughter was actually sitting right next to him, and she's like, lightning, and you can even hear her, on the phone. And so, for him, because he had been praying too, he's like, he was new to all this. I had just introduced him to the topic, and he was like, what's the deal, Father? If this is real, show me. And so he took that as a sign that this was the God wink for him. And, I heard his story, and it was, certainly intriguing. But that happened to him. It didn't happen to me. I was going to have to go on a longer journey, unfortunately,
Right. Well, I'm hoping the mic is better. I'm not sure what keeps happening. Okay, good. Thank God. All right. But the reason I had you bring up that particular story is because I also had previous in my lifetime that same experience happened to me, and it was on a day where it was absolutely clear, sunny. I was in deliberation. I was, basically not asking God for a sign, but deliberating in similar manner just over my experience and my belief in God. And that happened to me, and without a doubt, I knew immediately that was the Most High. And so that particular experience that happened there to Rick, and that was caught on video, took me back and reminded me of that experience that had happened to me previously as well. And I know that God speaks through the creation in such manner that he has the power to use lightning and the wind, the voice of many waters, that he speaks through his creation as well. And that is one of the ways that he has communicated with me, is through nature and through the creation. That particular experience was very deeply profound for me, as it was rattling for Rick and his daughter, and I think a lot of people that have watched and seen and how all that unfolded. I mean, in my opinion, it's undeniable that um, that there was something divine and supernatural to that whole occurrence, and for anybody that again has experienced that in similarity, I mean, without a doubt, sends chills up my spine.
Well, that's the thing, man. Like, I never had any of these types of like multiple confirming witness type experiences when I was talking about the cosmos and trying to make the Bible fit the model that we've all been taught.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't until I started I finally prayed and said, okay, Father, you show me what the text is saying. I mean, and this is an intentional prayer, because we all, whether we know it or not, are bringing preconceived bias to the text. We all have it, and so, I mean, for me, I was very much aware of it and was like very fervent in my prayer. Please, just Father, get me out of the way so I can hear your Holy Spirit show me what this text is saying,
Right.
And when I did that, I mean, these are all the crazy, I mean, yes, 2015, 16 were difficult years, man. They were rough. But
oh, no doubt.
During that time, I had lots of those things. I mean, Rick had that lightning thing. I had the Andy Hoy thing and other things. Just lots of different things. People coming along out of nowhere with encouragement or even a check to take us into the next month.
Mm-hmm.
And a way was made where we didn't feel like there was any way. Booking that trip to go across Lake Michigan when we did. It took over a year to get that trip together, to get the funds for it, to get our schedules lined up for it, and to get a boat captain to do it, and even the day that we did it, Rick had, as I understand it, he had another guy lined up, and at the last minute, the guy had already pulled out, and about the time that I'm landing the airplane, I'm in the airplane, and I'd already spent all this money to fly up there and take the time off and hotel and rental car and all that stuff, and we don't have a boat. So like Rick, one of these days I might get around to finishing the full story. It's like over an hour long video that I started a long time ago, never finished it, but because we interviewed people and there are lots of things that happened. But the guy that we did get, that was a very last minute thing. He turned out to be super cool. But the real thing was we pulled out of the dock like 47 miles away, looked out, even without the Nikon Coolpix P900, looked out across, and there's Chicago, like boom, right there. I didn't even need my camera to see it. And Tony, the boat captain, is like, man, this never happens. Like, I mean, we had a clear sight of the city from the moment we pulled out of the dock until we got to within 5 or 10 miles from it, and decided to turn around because he had to get back for other things. But and we had accomplished everything we needed to. So I mean, just lots of. I mean, I could take all night. That's going to take us off topic, but all night, just sharing these things. So this said, and while all that was happening, while I'm having all these God winks, I'm having these just crazy responses from people that, like, just sweet, loving, otherwise very laid back people were going bat crap crazy, insane,
right?
Like psychotically insane in front of me, just at the thought of me looking into this, and I'm like, whoa, what is happening? That's what led me to early on believe that, okay, there is a spiritual stronghold here that the enemy doesn't like being exposed, because it manifests like you wouldn't believe. And then there's other times where, I was just doing simple tests and coming up with, in my mind, profound revelation from these simple tests that anybody could do with like, $10 worth of arts and crafts from Walmart, that explain things on a flat plane just as easily, and with their science. You got the weatherman going to an optics professor to see if he was correct in saying that what you're seeing here is a mirage with the Chicago skyline. And the optics professor said, well, technically, no, it's more looming. And then they go to explain looming. And in the process of doing that, they say, the atmosphere is acting like a lens. Well, why is that? Because the atmosphere is full of moisture. And when you got zillions of convex balls of water that you make up the atmosphere, when you combine them together, what do you think you get? You get a huge convex lens, which is a magnifying glass. And so once I realized that, you get the magnifying sheet out, start doing some tests. I'm like, what? And then I go on Stellarium, which is spinning heliocentric globe-based software, trying to figure out how the 24-hour sun works in Antarctica, and inadvertently end up seeing how the sun and move over the sun and moon move over the flat Earth from their model.
Right.
And I'm like, well, how do they explain how the sun speeds up and slows down? This is spinning heliocentric globe-based software is showing the sun speeding up and slowing down at the exact time that it should speed up and slow down if it's moving over the circle of the Earth and contracting and expanding its circuit. I don't know how they explained it on the globe model, but it certainly made a lot of sense to me on the circle model. So I was like, okay, Father, this is amazing. And to one of your early points that you made just, I think, right before the break, you were talking about King Solomon's temple being built by Nephilim. Right. And that was a huge revelation for me also. I had come to the same conclusion a number of years ago, back in 2011. People go to BabylonRisingBlog.com as that website represents an entire year of blogging. That was just like 2011 was just brain dump every day. And if you scroll down the left-hand menu, you see a link called Concerned with Saturn. And the CERN is capped in the concern because it deals with the CERN Hadron Collider. Well, if you click on that page and you get about halfway, 3/4 of the way down, I show you in 1 Kings chapter 9, it says that there were still some people living in the land who were not Israelites, including Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. These were descendants of the nations who the people of Israel had not completely destroyed. They were commanded to utterly destroy these people during the campaign of Joshua, and they failed to get them all, and even David failed to get them all. So this is the time of Solomon, and it says, so Solomon conscripted them for his labor force, and they serve as a labor force to this day. And what's more is that's in 1 Kings chapter 9. 1 Kings chapter 10 says that the money that was being brought in to support the construction, they yearly received 666 talents of gold. That's 1 Kings chapter 10, 14. I'm like, what? Here's this. What? Here's this. The most holy temple, right? I mean, the Temple of Solomon, built by Nephilim with 666 talents of gold every year being brought in for it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Now all of a sudden it starts clicking in my head why. Okay, well that's why the Freemasons love this thing so much, because they're like all about the temple, right? It's their people built it, so I was like, well, what the heck made this thing holy then, And the only thing in my mind that made that thing holy was, at least at that time, Solomon, his heart was in the right place.
Yes.
Later he goes way off. But, David wasn't allowed to build this thing. So it passed. This was his father's dream, and, Solomon's father, David. And so he takes up the task to start doing it. And, the people that he hires to do it is like very suspect. And the way that he did it's very suspect. But after he did it, he prays this beautiful prayer of dedication. And this is my paraphrase totally. I could be totally off, totally wrong, but this is my interpretation of it, is that God looks at what Solomon had done in fulfillment of the promise for David, what he wanted to do. And I kind of see God going, okay, bro, all right, you did what your father wanted done. I appreciate it. Your prayer, that's pretty awesome. I'll tell you what, dude, if you walk in my ways and do my statutes, I will put my name on this thing that you've constructed. And that's the only thing in my mind that made it holy, is Father said, I'm going to put my name on this thing and I will bless you. And then there's the caveat. But if you don't walk in my ways, then I'm going to take my name off this thing, and all the consequences and all that's going to happen afterwards, which we certainly see takes place later. So to me, the building itself, there's nothing holy about that thing,
right?
And if you keep reading on that blog, I talk about the 72 goetic demons, the lesser key of Solomon, the testament of Solomon, Lord of the Rings trilogy, how that was all tied in, and how he had hired what was it, Hiram, to build the thing. Jeez. So I don't know. I mean, for me, that could be an argument that it was built something other than the dome tent, considering the people who were involved.
Right.
So I could honestly go either way with it. I'm waiting to hear what Andy comes up with.
Yeah, I would be interested to see what he says as well, because in examining, as far as the way that you have the outer, then the inner sanctum, and then you have the Holy of Holies, and also the way that Noah's Ark was built with these 3 different levels, and then the wilderness tabernacle in the same manner, it, in my opinion, represents what we see of the cosmology, with the first 2 heavens below the firmament, and then the 3rd heaven being the place like the Holy of Holies, where the presence of the Most High God is, that sits above the vaulted dome of the earth. It seems to represent that cosmology and the way that God has established it. And so in the book that I wrote, Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch, I speak about those divisions with each one of those structures, but it would be really interesting to see what Andy comes up with as far as, him being a structural engineer and all that with regard to Solomon's temple, because his reconstruction of the wilderness tabernacle, Moshe's wilderness tabernacle, and being dome shaped, it would make sense to me. But again, what really was it in representation of, and like you said, was it skewed in some manner because of the labor force and even the demons' involvement and the Nephilim? And I mean, it would be intriguing to see.
Well, yeah, and if Andy's model is correct, there are the other curtains on the inside for the Holy of Holies that had the cherubim on them, right? And so, obviously, if it's a circular dome tent, then the Holy of Holies is in the center of the highest part of the dome.
Right.
So you have these really long, tubular curtains, creating like a tube within which the Holy of Holies would be, right? Which, visually speaking, that makes a lot more sense to me than the little compartment in the back of the rectangular box.
Right.
So I started thinking, geez, if that model is correct, and Moses, if that model is correct, then I believe Moses was, it says that he was shown things in the heavenlies that he was to emulate here on earth. So it was like whatever he saw, he was given a blueprint to emulate that. So if that's the case, then the circular dome tent that Andy designed would be the earthly representation of this thing that we're living in.
Exactly.
And so then, geographically speaking, the curtains around the Holy of Holies could be the what we call the Aurora Borealis, or the Northern Lights. Is we get these wavy curtain looking, and I've seen those before. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but they.
No, I haven't. It's
a spectacular sight. It's actually kind of a funny story. I was working a job up at Fort Kent, Maine, way up in northern Maine, and between gigs we would go out canoeing, and there were lots of forking rivers that went all over the place. So we went out and we got lost.
Oh my goodness!
And we're in the middle of nowhere, northern Maine, woodland, and we had no idea where we were. And the water, it starts getting dark, and the water starts speeding up, and we start hearing.
Oh no!
And we're like, we're starting to speed up, and we're slamming into rocks and stuff, and like, this is not good. We don't know what's ahead, but and they're like caribou and bear and stuff on the land, so we're like,
oh my goodness,
middle of nowhere. So we end up seeing a lone street light in the distance, and we're like, head for the light. So we headed for the light, and it was like a boat ramp. And so we pulled all our boats up there. Now I was low man on the totem pole, right? So everybody else is like, okay, we're gonna go into town and see if we can get a ride back. You watch the gear, Skiba. I'm like, okay. So I'm sitting there by myself, and I had just seen a news report where I think it was Clinton had just signed a 7-year peace treaty with Israel, the Oslo Accords, I think it was, or something like that. And so, at that time I was a pre-tribber and all this stuff. I'm like, oh, this is it, 7-year peace treaty, right? So I was a pre-tribber, convinced that I just saw the signing of the 7-year peace treaty on the news like a couple of days ago. And I'm sitting there by myself in the dark, and I'm looking up at the sky, and it's like a zillion stars, right? And all of a sudden the sky rips open. It's like, it didn't make that sound, but in my head it did,
Yeah.
And all of a sudden these like green and blue and magenta, like neon color looking wavy things like Venetian blinds start going. And I had never seen that before. And I didn't think you could see the northern lights, that far south. I thought you had to be further north into Canada or whatever. So I'm seeing them. Now I'm thinking that's the sky ripping open, right? This is the rapture. I swear to you, this is true. That was like, this is it, and while I'm having this rapturous moment, the guys that got a ride, and the truck pulls in behind me, and I didn't hear it because of the river. And when the lights of the truck pulled in, it illuminated there was a fog that had settled about 2 feet over the river in front of me. And when the lights hit it, it was like a perfect layer of cloud. And I thought,
oh, I've been pulled up.
Like I started stepping out like I'm gonna step out on the cloud. I thought, I had this vision I was gonna go fly up like Superman, but maybe we ride up in a cloud. Okay, that's cool. Right? So like I'm totally in the moment. I'm stepping out on the cloud, right? Of course, hitting the water, And then I hear, Skiba, what the F and what the hell? What are you doing? Oh, nothing.
Oh man, that's funny.
It's one of these stories that sticks with you. But now I have that story in my head, and I remember it so vividly. And when I saw Andy's model and started thinking about the curtains like that, I'm going, wow. And then when you start talking about Mount Meru and the sides of the north, right, and all that stuff right there, I'm going, wow, Andy's model just makes so much sense. And I would encourage people to look into it. I do want to show something else here, though. How much time we have before we break? About 3 minutes.
Minute 30.
Yeah. Minute 30. Okay. Well, we have confirming witnesses. We've already showed you that raqiya from raka, beaten down metal strips. That the Hebrew word signifies solid. The Hebrew scholars took their Hebrew text, translated into Greek, got stereoma, which is even more adamant that we're talking about a solid structure. And then Jerome comes along later, and Latin comes up with firmamentum, from which we later get firmament. In every case, the word indicates something hard, solid structure. The word itself, the definitions of the words. But we have confirming witnesses to that in Job 37:18, and you can look in multiple translations.
Yes.
King Jimmy says, "Hast thou with him spread out the sky, which is strong as a molten looking glass?" Other ones say, spread out the skies hard as a cast metal mirror. Bronze mirror, cast mirror, bronze. Multiple translations talking about a hard structure, reflective hard structure. And then another confirming witness in Proverbs 8:28, where it says, "When he made firm the skies above."
Yes.
This thing is firm. It's a hard structure with multiple confirming witnesses. And you were the one that, when I did this, I think one of our first interviews, that pointed out Amos 9:6. And
right.
It's a good place to stop here before we go to break. But come back and talk about that, because I think Amos 9:6 is a huge deal and worth diving into.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And yeah, we'll pick it up right there when we return. And Bill, I'll answer your question on the other side of break. We'll be right back, everyone, for final segment. All right, welcome back, everybody, for final segment. Bill asks in the chat room, is the Book of Enoch the sealed up book for this generation, or is there another book of prophecy? Well, definitely the Book of Enoch, as it makes mention of in the first chapter, was wrote for a remote and distant generation. And I do believe that we are that generation, and that we're seeing the unfoldment of the Joel 2 and Acts, where God promised to pour out his spirit upon all flesh. That I believe a lot of the collections and a lot of the ancient manuscripts, which have been lost and forbidden and forgotten, are coming to light again. And a lot of that has to do with the access that we have through the internet and people posting, and a lot of these ancient manuscripts, digitized copies being rendered and made of these collections, which have been protected in large part by certain groups and certain monasteries, certain peoples, that there's ongoing efforts worldwide from different individuals to digitize and make digitized copies of a lot of these ancient texts. And in doing so, they are coming to the forefront and being made available to the public in a way that has never, previously, that we've had that kind of access. And so I do absolutely believe that, a lot of knowledge is coming to light. And yes, the Book of Enoch is part of that fulfillment, but I believe that others are also part of that revelation, and that the book that we put together, the Great Commission 3 on the end time apocalypses, and most of those texts the public have never heard about, all of these apocalyptic texts that are specific to the end times, that that is part of that collection and that revealing. Rob, would you care to comment on that, and then we'll move into Amos 9:6?
Well, yeah, I'm a big. That's why we're doing the show. This is a lead into the Book of Enoch. So I'm
right.
It's going to take us a long time to get there, I think. But after we get through Genesis 6, we'll jump into the Book of Enoch. But yeah, I mean, right off the bat, I mean, the first chapter, the first verse, the first chapter of the Book of Enoch says, "This is not for this generation, but for a future generation who will live in the day of tribulation." And the timing, it's been around for a while, but then we find, I think there was 6 copies of the Book of Enoch in Cave 4 alone of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, this was a very popular text for that community. And, I think I was actually thinking about this earlier today as we're going through the Book of Enoch. One of the things I'd like to do while we're doing it is to make correlations to the canonized text from verses that we read in Enoch, because I started doing this a long time ago. Is as I was reading something in the Book of Enoch, I said, "Oh, that's this," or there's a parallel to that in this scripture right here from the canonized text, and just kind of go through that to show how clearly the authors of Scripture were very much aware of and heavily influenced by that book, and I think we'd be foolish to write it off, in my opinion.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, especially when you consider that things like the biblical cosmology and the fact that Enoch spends 14 chapters in the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries describing the motions of the sun, the moon, the stars, the wandering stars, and there's not one passage or verse attributed to the motion of the earth, because there is no motion to the earth, is confirmation of exactly what the Bible reveals. There's 5 passages which specifically declare that the earth is fixed and motionless and stationary. And so, yeah, these kind of things. And as I show in my book, that when you really apply what Enoch describes as these motions, as you also brought it forth in the Stellarium, that, I believe Enoch was shown exactly what you were led to revelation on, using Stellarium, that he saw that exact motion of the sun, speeding up and slowing down as it moves back and forth between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, creating the seasons and the elongation of the day and the night, and then the shortening of them. I mean, that's exactly what Enoch describes, with the motions of the sun and the moon through the 6 gates of heaven, as I share in Decryption within that book. So yeah, I do absolutely look forward to getting into that. And but we'll go into Amos 9:6 now, because I think this passage also shows and affirms why it is that we should study all accounts when examining a particular passage or a particular verse. Because for those that are, the King James only crowd, in looking at this particular passage in Amos 9:6, you miss the context of what is captured in other translations. And specifically, I'll read the verse in the King James that says, "It is he that buildeth his stories in the heaven, and hath founded his troop in the earth. He that calleth for the waters of the sea, and poureth them out upon the face of the earth. The Lord is his name." In the NASB, it translates it as this: "The one who builds his upper chambers in the heavens, and has founded his vaulted dome over the earth. He who calls for the waters of the sea, and pours them out on the face of the earth. The Lord is his name." Well, I spent an entire chapter on this particular verse in my 10th book, The Vaulted Dome, Firmament, the Vaulted Dome of the Earth. And this was a critical passage for me, because in examining and looking at, because you have to really tie it together in context to the verse that precedes it in order to really understand the fullness of why it is that I believe it should be translated vaulted dome over the earth rather than troop. And looking at those words and looking at the definitions for that word aguda, which is the one that is translated as vaulted dome, when you look at the independent definitions, the verses, the definitions are band, binding, cords, bands, thongs, metaphorical of slavery, a bunch of hyssop, a band of men, troops, and the vault of the heavens, the firmament, binding the earth to the heavens. And so, reconsidering that and really examining that, it's my opinion that that whole verse is describing again how it is that the heavens through the vaulted dome are bound to the earth, and that they form, what we see again, even in the structure of the wilderness tabernacle, what Andy brought forth as this dome-like structure, that it's showing the unit, that, they dwell under the tent. He sitteth upon the circle of the earth, that the heavens spread out as a curtain above, they form together a tent. And so it's like the foundation of the earth, the heavens spread out above it, they form this dome-like tent, and they make a unit. And so, again, understanding it in that manner, it would make sense why this verse would be translated vaulted dome, and because it shows the symmetry of that particular unit and its connections to the heaven, the earth, and the heavens being bound together by the vaulted dome of the earth. And so I thought that was, very interesting, and something that you and I, when we talked about it previously, it was a revelation to all of us.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, it was huge. Because, I grew up in a King James only environment. I myself am not King James only, but, all my go-to verses, my memory verses and all that are in King James. So,
right.
I was used to troop, and, as a result, that went completely over my head, just completely missed it. And you were the first that I heard talk about it. I'm like, what? So I went and looked, and right now I have up on the screen for people who are watching this on YouTube, numerous English translations. You can go to BibleHub.com, Bible.cc, and just punch up Amos 9:6 and look at all the different English translations, and they're talking about that he's founded the heaven, the vault of heaven on the earth. He set the foundation of heaven on the earth. And what was intriguing to me is not only did numerous English translations say that, but Bible Hub has even other foreign languages on there. So you could look at Chinese and Russian and, all kinds of different languages are on there. So what I did was I went through those different languages and copied and pasted them into Google Translate, which granted is not always 100% accurate, but it's still a reasonably good tool to, at least take a look at. And when I did that, I mean, it was even more emphatic in some of the other languages, shockingly. Right. So if you haven't done that, you might want to even check that out. Just like go to bible.cc and look up that verse and look at the foreign languages, and then copy paste them in Amos 9:6 into Google Translate and see what you get. But, when I understood that the word is a tightly knit unit, it's something bound together. I can understand why the King James translators, coming off of the Copernican revolution, by the way, may have looked at that and missed it because of, again, we all bring preconceived biases to the text, right? So, and I would say that probably extends even to translators. They're not perfect either. And, I'm sure these are godly men who took time to pray as they were doing the translations. I have no doubt of that. But when I looked at the word troop, I was in the Army and I was in C Troop, 1st of the 110th Air Cav. Well, what was it? It's a troop is a tightly knit unit of men, a band of brothers, as they say, right? So, I understand that it's talking about knitting together. But what I was missing is that, it's the context is here. He has built the upper chambers of heaven, and he's knit that to the earth.
Right.
He's bound it to the earth. And the other English translators, and again, the other foreign language translators, they got it. They understood it. And I was like, wow, that's just crazy right there. Because then it starts to make sense where it talks about, when it talks about the heavens shaking, the earth is shaking. When the earth is shaking, the heavens are shaking. Well, why? Because they're connected.
Right. Yes, exactly.
They're shaking. And then all of a sudden, I'll bring something else up here. Psalm 19. If you go to Psalm 19, this is a perfect correlation to what we're talking about, day 2 of creation, Genesis chapter 1. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. The firmament shows his handiwork. So when you just write the firmament off and say that it's just an expanse of air, gas, and the vacuum of space, you are the very thing that declares the handiwork of God, you are nullifying. Right. You are turning it into nothing. This thing declares his glory and shows his handiwork. If you're just going to say it's nothing, it's air, gas, and the vacuum of space. Now, the counter argument with that would be, well, no, have you ever looked up in the sky? Look at the grandeur of the universe and the galaxies and the stars and all that, yeah, but it's the firmament that we're talking about here. So what you are imagining doesn't work, and that thing's connected to the earth. It's a physical hard structure. By confirming witnesses and by definitions of the words themselves, it is a firm hard structure. And Amos just told you that firm hard structure is connected to the earth. And then David comes along here and said, well, actually David probably precedes Amos, but anyway, all of the biblical authors are writing in the context of what has come before. So they don't contradict each other. They build upon what the other person said. Isaiah is one of the last guys, if not the last guy, to write about the cosmology. So anything that he's talking about, spread out the heavens like a tent and circle of the earth, he's writing in the context of what Solomon knew, what David knew, what Job knew, what Moses knew, what Amos knew, all these people. So day unto day, verse 2, Psalm 19, verse 2, day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle, an enclosed structure for the sun. He set a tabernacle, an enclosed structure for the sun. Again, another metaphor here, which is as, simile, a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, rejoicing as a strong man to run a race. So the sun's moving, not the earth. The sun, his going forth is from the end of heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of it. And there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. Question to those of you who don't believe what we're talking about here, how does this verse work? For you that believe in the Copernican model and the spinning heliocentric globular earth model, how does that work for you? It doesn't. There's no way you can make that work. Right. You'd have to put on one heck of a tap dancing mental gymnastic yoga trick to make that work. It's just not going to happen. And, when it says that the circuit is from one end of the heaven to the other, well, the heaven's connected to the earth.
Yes.
With a dome, if it's a dome, then it presumably gets shallower as you get closer to the edges. Right. So if the sun's moving out on its outer circuit, it literally is going to the ends of the heaven, and working its way back on a circuit, running a race. How can you make that fit if the sun is just in the a wing of the Milky Way galaxy in the backwater section of the universe. How is the sun going from one end of heaven to the other?
Right,
How
exactly.
does that work? It can't work.
Right, and then again, when we get to it on day 4, the sun wasn't even established and created or placed into the tabernacle, the firmament, until the 4th day of creation, and the earth. For all those that believe in the whole planetary accretion model, which they say that the sun came to being first and then spinning in orbit all of these dust globs that came to form planets, and that these planets are still in orbit around the sun, that model doesn't work because the earth was already here. And then the firmament fitted to the circle of the earth. uh, that's where the sun and the luminaries and the moon were placed in tabernacle and hold their circuit, which is exactly what Enoch describes. Again, the motions are attributed to the moon, the sun, the luminaries, the wandering stars, and not to the earth. And you can't explain those things. Even like the story of the sun and the moon being stopped in Joshua's long day.
Right.
I mean, how do you get around that? And then the sun going back 10 degrees in
Yeah.
Isaiah,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, it's not the earth that is being moved in order to shift the sun, it's the sun. And it clearly in the scriptures, it tells us even the word shamash, which is, the word that in the Hebrew that comes for the sun, it describes rapidly moving. It's one of the definitions for it. And so it shows that even the word for it describes its motion. And so these are things that, because there are people even in the chat room now, they believe anything to do with, flat earth or biblical cosmology is just ludicrous, but you can't explain all of these things that we've just brought forth without examining with open mind those considerations. And it only makes sense when you understand it in the manner that we, hesitantly, very hesitantly, and unwillingly were brought to acceptance upon.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have another confirming witness in the Book of Enoch, chapter 89, where there's a vision given of the coming flood.
Yeah.
And it says, beginning of verse 2, and again I raised mine eyes toward heaven and saw a lofty roof with 7 water torrents thereon, and those torrents flowed with much water into an enclosure. And I saw again, and behold, fountains were opened on the surface of that great enclosure, and that water began to swell and rise upon the surface. And I saw that enclosure till all its surface was covered with water. And the water, the darkness, the mist increased upon it. And as I looked at the height of that water had risen above the height of that enclosure and was streaming over that enclosure, and it stood upon the earth. And all the cattle of that enclosure were gathered together until I saw how they sank and were swallowed up and perished in that water.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you want to talk about a slam. When I read this, I was like, what? Enoch is a slam dunk.
Right.
For
absolutely.
The circular enclosed world biblical cosmology, model. I mean, how can you look at that and not see, and I would parallel that with Genesis chapter 7. It says, and the windows of heaven were opened.
Right.
Well, windows are something set in solid structures.
Yes, exactly.
So how in the world do you, I've got a picture up on the screen right now, which one makes more sense, right? The spinning ball, where's the windows? Where's the enclosure, right? That these texts are talking about. I mean, it doesn't work.
Right. I'll read that verse that I read, just a portion of it earlier from the Perk de Rabbi Eleazar, where it says, the dome or inside shape of the heavens ascends upwards like a tub. That is to say, like a tent, which is spread out with its extremities fixed downwards, and its dome stretching upwards so that people can sit beneath it and their feet stand on the earth. whilst all of them are inside the tent. And likewise are the heavens. Their extremities are fixed downwards, and their dome stretches upwards, and all creatures dwell beneath them as in a tent, as it is said, and he spreadeth them out as a tent to dwell in. And so, I mean, yeah, when you find these examples, even Flavius Josephus, all of what we talked about, with regards to the second day of creation, the raqiya, the firmament, stereoma. I mean, again, you cannot deny these things. And then once we get to day 4, the luminaries being established and given circuit and established in the tabernacle of the firmament, it's, in my opinion, undeniable.
Absolutely, and I know we're going to run out of time pretty quick here, so I'm going to sum up, my take on it with the PowerPoint slide from my presentation, where for me the firmament is truly the key to this whole thing. If you want to figure out what creation is all about, you got to do an in-depth study of the firmament. It's what seals the deal in more ways than one, pardon the pun, right? Unquestioned, the thing is hard, Job 37:18, firm, Proverbs 8:28, supporting the waters above, Genesis 1:6-8, and Psalm 148:4. It's attached to the earth, Amos 9:6, within which Yahuwah placed the sun, moon, and stars, Genesis 1:14-19, and Psalm 19:1-6, and upon which his throne sits, Ezekiel 1:26, Isaiah 66:1. Clearly, this is a very important issue to Yahuwah, Psalm 19:1. The only model that accommodates every aspect of the firmament is the circular enclosed world model. The only way around this is to grossly misrepresent the scriptures, yanking the true meaning of the words used out of context and fantasizing about definitions for those words, which are not even remotely supported by the text or the historical context in which the scriptures were written. The firmament, man, guys, if you want to understand cosmology, you got to spend some time looking at the firmament. If you're going to call yourself a Bible scholar, start there.
Yes, and if you're going to really believe the Word of God, then take some time to look up the original context of the words that are found in these passages, and to get a conceptualization of what the ancient Hebrews believed themselves. And again, undeniable. And we were hesitant, unwilling for a very long time when first confronted and asked to do this research. And I know a lot of the people out there that are still unsure are as well. But very well said, brother. I think you summed it up in great manner. 2 minutes, so final comment?
Yeah, I just it took an entire day for God to do the firmament. When I was thinking about life, as we get to the later days of creation, when he starts creating animals and birds and fish and eventually humans, he in some of these cases, he took entire days to make these life forms. And it doesn't take much research to look at the vast diversity of all life, whether we're talking plant life, birds, fish, land animals, even the diversity in people, right? Like there's tremendous detail in the creation of life, and some of those creations took an entire day. Well, put that into perspective. It took the entire day for God to create the firmament.
Yes.
Like, this is a serious deal.
Right.
And when I start looking at the historical record after Admiral Byrd, went down there for Operation High Jump and Deep Freeze, and then immediately the United States and Russia start launching high-altitude nuclear bombs into the sky, and we called our side of it Project Fishbowl, which is part of Operation Dominic, and Pastor Cressman out in Lubbock said, yeah, look up the name Dominic, and we looked up the name Dominic, and it's a Latin name. It means of the Lord. So, like, we literally called our mission the fishbowl of the Lord, and we're launching high altitude nukes into the sky after the Admiral Byrd, expedition down there for Operation Deep Freeze.